We just had this wild idea that maybe Margaret Coel would come and speak with us on some Sunday morning, and so we just asked her, and she said yes. So we were very grateful, Margaret, to have you and your husband George with us today. You may know Margaret Coel from her work as a popular mystery writer, the Wind River Mystery Series, detailing the lives of the Arapaho people who settled up in Wyoming on the Wind River Reservation. And she's also done a work of nonfiction. Erica, will you grab that book right there and hold it up? I forgot to bring it up here. Stand up and hold it up really high. Thank you. So she wrote Chief Left Hand, which we encouraged everyone in this particular congregation to read over the course of the last year. We passed copies around and bought new copies and so on, which is a biography of Chief Left Hand, Chief Niwot. So that is her work of nonfiction. And she's going to speak to us today about her journey with the Arapaho people, their spirituality, and a little bit about Chief Left Hand. I found, there's an article in the Left Hand Valley Courier, if you haven't read it, about Margaret Coel and her speaking here today. There was a lovely quote from a review that author Sandra Dallas wrote, a review of her latest novel, and she wrote this review for the Denver Post. And she says that Coel writes realistically about the Wind River Reservation, about the poverty and alcoholism. It's clear she knows the Arapaho too. Her characters are not cliches, but real people who are imbued with the richness of their Indian heritage. So she's not just an author speaking hypothetically, but an author who has gotten to know and care about the people that she's writing about. So we're grateful and privileged to have Margaret Coel speak with us today. I'll let her come and speak with us now. Thank you for being here.
Reverend Pam. It's a great honor to be here and to have a chance to speak and to take part with you in this just beautiful and meaningful service. It just brought tears to my eyes listening to the choir sing that lovely song. And also, there is another sign of peace when Reverend Pam was talking to the children about peace signs, and it is this. And this is the Plains Indian sign of peace. And this is the Arapaho sign of peace. This month we are commemorating the 150th anniversary of the Sand Creek Massacre of the Arapaho and Cheyenne Indians in southern Colorado. It occurred on November 29, 1864. At first we thought there were about 150 Indians who were killed, but now later research by historians has placed the number at 200. There were 600 people there, so a third of them were killed. Most of them were women and children and old people because the warriors who had been with them had gone out onto the plains to try to find food for the people. Now, among the people who was killed there was one of the really great citizens of Colorado, and his name was Left Hand. His name was also Niwot. Niwot is the Arapaho word for left hand. It means left hand. However, let me tell you, it is not pronounced Niwot in Arapaho. It is pronounced something like Niwot. And I have to say something like, because I maintain I'm learning a little Arapaho. My Arapaho friends dispute that, and they tell me that whatever it is I'm speaking, it is not Arapaho. But I can tell you, it is something like Niwot. So who is this man? He was an Arapaho, and the Arapahos and the Cheyennes lived here on the plains of Colorado. This was their land. This was their land, acknowledged by the federal government in a treaty. That was the first treaty that was ever signed between the government and the Indian tribes. And that was signed in 1851, in which the government acknowledged that this land, the land between the two rivers, the Platte River and the Arkansas, from the Continental Divide of the mountains out to a point in Kansas, it's a very vast land. This land belonged to the Cheyennes and the Arapahos. So who were the Arapahos? And why was I interested in them? I'm a fourth generation Coloradan. I grew up on the old stories of Colorado. I grew up hearing about all the things that had happened. And I became very interested in people who had lived here before my family and everybody else came. And those people were the Arapahos and the Cheyennes on the plains, the Utes in the mountains. So I read a lot about them, but the tribe that really caught my interest was the Arapahos. And there were two reasons for that. For one thing, they were very practical people. They were hunters, of course, they lived by the buffalo, and they were traders. And located here on the Central Plains, they were the medium through which trade was exchanged all across the plains. So it was through the Arapahoes that all the tribes traded. When the first white people came out here, they called them the businessmen of the plains. So I like that about them. And at the same time, they were deeply, and are today, a deeply spiritual people. Deeply spiritual. This is how James Michener, in his novel Centennial, described them. And from the southwest came the poets of the prairies, less arrogant than the Cheyenne, less imposing than the Sioux. They were handsome men, grave of countenance and stately of mien. They were the philosophers and artists, the ones who listened when others spoke. But they were not to be trifled with, these Arapaho, for they were men and women gifted with an inner dignity that had never been subdued. An anthropologist in the 1890s described them as this way. The Arapahoes are devotees and prophets, continually seeing signs and wonders. They believed in the Creator, the one God, the Creator, who gave us all of creation, the earth, the sky, the two-leggeds, the four-leggeds, the wingeds. And all of creation is a whole, and we are all of us creatures are all related. They believe that three things are necessary for success or happiness in life: harmony, generosity, and respect. And if you live with those three things, then you are a success. And that is called living the Arapaho way. There are a couple of things that I really loved about them and as I learned about them, and one is the way they treated their elders and still treat their elders. It's a wonderful thing to go to the reservation and see the respect with which elderly people are held. To see teenagers turn to their elders and ask their advice. I mean, when do you ever see that? And I've always said that when I allow this hair to go really gray, I'm going to the reservation where I know I'll get some respect. They believe that all of us travel, we climb the 4 hills of life. And the first hill we climb, from the time we were born until we're about in our early 20s, that's the first hill. And when we reach the top of that hill, we can see quite a bit. We see quite a bit, and we think we know quite a bit. And then we start up the second hill. And we reach that when we're about in our early 40s. And we think, oh my goodness, we're up higher now. We can see so much more. We understand more. And then we start the third hill, which takes us maybe into our 60s. And now we're getting up there and we think, wow, now we really understand a lot because we can see so much. And finally, we climb the 4th hill. And that's the hill where we finally become wise. And that's why they revere their elders so much, because their elders have climbed those 4 hills and see so much more than the rest of us can yet see. They raised their children by what they call the easiest way, which was to talk to them, to explain to them how to live. They never struck a child. They believed that to strike a child was to break his spirit, and to live on the plains, you needed to have people with spirit. This was a harsh environment to live in. And so this is how they taught their children. So one of their great leaders in the mid-1800s was Left Hand, Niwot. There are places named for him. We remember him because he loved the Boulder Valley. And he brought his village here to camp every winter. Places here are named for him: Niwot, the town, Left Hand Canyon, Left Hand Creek, Niwot Methodist Church. We remember him in our place names. And what caught my interest about him was that he could speak English. He was fluent in English. And as I was learning more about the Plains Indians, I realized very few of them ever learned to speak English, only a handful. And the reason for that was that each tribe had its own language. They spoke their own languages, but the common language on the plains was the sign language. Everybody uses sign language. There was no need to ever learn to speak anybody else's language. And yet this man became fluent in English. And I wondered, who was this man? Why? Why was he interested enough in other people to learn to speak their language? A journalist, Horace Greeley, came out here in 1859 from Boston, and he interviewed Left Hand. And he wrote that he spoke English fluently. He said he spoke English better than a lot of people in Boston. So I began to look into this man, thinking at the time I was a journalist and I was writing for magazines, and I thought, I'll write an article about this, Arapaho chief who learned to speak English. And of course, I started digging and digging and digging, and the magazine article I hoped to write actually became a book, Chief Left Hand. Every source that I found led me to other sources, and little by little his life began to emerge. A narrative about him began to emerge. Let me tell you, first of all, why he learned to speak English, because I always forget to mention this. His sister married a white man, a trader, by the name of John Poisal. And John Poisal started living with his village. Left Hand at the time was a young boy. And Poisal took him under his wing and taught him to speak English. So as I kept working, the narrative of Left Hand's life and times began to emerge. He was a complicated man. He was a man of the plains. He lived on the wide open, windswept places, the vast spaces, and the great distances that we know as the plains. He was not a simple man. There were many conflicts. He was a man of peace who gave his life in the cause of peace, and yet he was a war chief who led his warriors on buffalo hunts. He led his warriors out to protect the villages. He led them out to protect the hunting lands. He was a man of his own time and his own place, and he was thrust into a changing world. He was certainly a man of his own culture, who yet was interested enough in other cultures to learn to speak the language of other people. The head chief at the time of the Arapahoes was Chief Little Raven Hosa. He did not speak English. The other head chiefs of the Cheyennes, they did not speak English. So it was Left Hand, when the gold rush happened and all the people started coming out here, it was Left Hand who became their interpreter, who became the spokesperson for the Arapahoes and the Cheyennes. The gold rush occurred in 1858. 35,000 men. Women came later. Men came here. 35,000 to the plains. At the time, there were maybe 6,000 or 7,000 Arapahoes and Cheyennes. In the spring of 1859, which is called the real gold rush, 150,000 men came here. So just think about that. You know, the Arapahoes said they thought all the white men in existence had come to the plains. They couldn't imagine there were any more anywhere. They said the numbers shocked their minds. So this is what Left Hand was up against. He believed that these new people coming here to the plains, that his people and the Cheyennes could live in peace with these new people. He saw things in these white people who were coming out here. There were many things that he thought that his people could learn about. They could learn how to get their food out of the ground. They could learn how to farm. They could learn how to build permanent buildings on the plains. They could learn that. At the same time, there were things he believed that his people could teach these white people who had no idea of what the wild vegetables and fruits were or how to find them on the plains, and who suffered greatly from scurvy because of that. They knew how to do that. They knew how to live on the plains. They knew how to keep the rivers from being polluted. They understood the geography and the great distances of the plains, whereas white settlers were always getting lost out here because they didn't understand. White people were unprepared for the hardships on the plains, but the Arapahoes did not see this as a place of hardships. It was a beautiful land, they said, a beautiful land that had been given to them by the Creator. He was comfortable with white people. He went to the Rocky Mountain News at one point after the Rocky Mountain News had printed a derogatory article about the Arapahoes, and he demanded a retraction. And the interesting thing is, the editor, William Byers, wrote the retraction. He believed Left Hand, and he believed his version of what had happened. He took his warriors to see a play at the Apollo Theater on Larimer Street. And after the play, he jumped up on the stage. and he talked to them, to the people, and he said, as you have come here looking for gold, then take your gold and go home. But of course, they weren't going to go home because they were finding gold and they wanted to find more gold. He visited the people here in Boulder. He got to know the settlers here in Boulder, around Haystack Mountain, in what is now Niwot. He would go and visit with them, spend time with them, talking to them, trying to understand how can we live together here. How could he deal with the authorities, Governor Evans, Colonel Shivington, who was head of the military district here. How can we deal with these people? How can we make peace? This was his goal in life. He became what was known, what the warriors called, one of the talking chiefs. These were the peace chiefs. Left Hand, prominent because he spoke English, Little Raven, Black Kettle, and White Antelope are the Cheyennes, the peace chiefs. The Arapahoes, the warriors called them the talking chiefs. Because while they talked and talked and talked with these white people, things were just becoming impossible on the plains. The buffalo were being scattered, were being slaughtered. Their children were hungry. They couldn't find enough food to eat. They were being harassed from one place to another. It was a horrible situation, and it really got worse. By 1863, 5 years after the gold rush, the Indian lands, these vast, vast lands, were in the hands of the newcomers, the outsiders, the white people, who were building towns and ranches and wagon stations all over the land. And the buffalo, of course, being destroyed and dispersed. It was becoming more and more difficult to feed their people. And at one point, the warriors actually cut off the overland trail in 1864. And this was huge because all the settlements out here were dependent upon goods coming from the east, food coming from the east, and all their supplies. So this was huge. So things were really, really coming to a very, very, very dangerous point by the fall of 1864. And some of the peace chiefs came to Denver to meet with Governor Evans and Colonel Shivington. And at that meeting, it's called the Camp Weld Council, they were told by Evans and Shivington, take your people and go down and put them under the protection of the soldiers at Fort Lyon. And we will make a peace with you. Await the peace agreement, they said. So they did that. They went out, they got their people, they brought them into Fort Lyon. And when they got there, the soldiers there said, we can't feed all these people, 600 people. The soldiers said, take them over to Sand Creek, which is about 40 miles away, camp there, and your warriors can go out and hunt. And that's what they did. And that's where they were on the morning of November 29th, when Shivington marched down there with the 3rd Colorado Regiment and attacked the camp. It was a sleeping camp. What happened was, the historians from that moment on weren't sure what had happened to Left Hand at Sand Creek. We know he's there. There's lots of evidence he was there. That's not a problem. Oh, thank you so much. Now that is a peaceful gesture. Thank you. But they didn't know what happened to him because his body was not found on the battleground, at the massacre site. However, in all the digging that I did discover letters that very much proved what had happened to him. And these letters were written by George Bent, who was the son of William Bent, who had built Bent's Fort. And he was a half Cheyenne. He was at Sand Creek. He had known Left Hand all his life. He knew what happened to him. And he wrote a whole series of letters explaining how Left Hand was mortally wounded at Sand Creek, how he, along with some of the other wounded, were able to get out onto the plains and were eventually rescued by Sioux warriors who had gotten word that this attack was going on. And they had come out onto the plains looking for survivors and then had brought these survivors, including Left Hand and including George Bent, who was also wounded, brought them into this large Sioux camp. And Left Hand died at that camp. When the shooting began, he had run out of his teepee with his hands up in the Plains Indian sign of peace, saying, "We are peaceful. Stop, stop, we are peaceful." And he was shot down. So in doing the research for this book, one of the things that we did, we went every place that's in the book, Chief Left Hand. I wanted to visit all these places. I wanted to visit the sites of the villages, the battlegrounds, the forts, the places where they had traded, all these different places. I just wanted to be there and to see them. And so I wanted to go to the site of the Sioux camp where he died and where he was buried. And that is located near Cheyenne Wells in southeastern Colorado. So it's on a private ranch today. So we went there and we found the ranch house, my husband and I, and we talked to the rancher and we said, we'd like to go out, we'd like to see this site on your ranch here that was a Sioux camp in 1864. And we said, we will not hurt it, we will not harm anything, we will not take anything, we just want to be there. And this crusty old rancher's looking us up and down. He looks at our car, he sees our license plates, and he says, "Oh, and you're from Boulder." I just want to be there. Yes. So he gave us permission, and we went out to find this site of the Sioux camp. It was in August. It was a blazing hot day. And we drove as far as we could, and then we had to park the car, and we had to start walking. And I knew from all the research, because there are many, there's a lot of information as to where exactly the camp was located. It's located between in the fork of two creeks. They're dry creeks today, but at that time they were certainly flowing. So we followed the creek until we got to the fork, where it forked with another creek. The plains are brown. There's just brown everywhere. It's hot as blazes, as I said. And as we're walking along, we look, and here, with us, hopping along on the ground, was an owl. And every time, we go a little ways, and we look around, and here was the owl. And we thought, this is strange. We kept going. What we didn't know from the historical record was that the Sioux camp was located in the fork of these two creeks, but it was up on a bluff in this fork. So when we got there, we had to climb up a little slope to get to the top, and it was a plateau on top. And here's the owl coming with us. And we got up there, and the plateau, it was huge. And it was a sea of wildflowers. In the midst of the brown plains, brown everywhere, the sea of wildflowers, every color you can imagine. I had a camera with me, and I took pictures, but the photos don't even begin to do it justice. It was so beautiful. This was the site of the Sioux camp. This was where Left Hand was brought. This is where he died, and this is where he was buried. We looked around, the owl was gone. But I found out from the Arapahoes that whenever a spirit decides to come to visit you, it will come in the form of an owl. I told some of the elders this story several different times. And whenever I tell the story, they don't say anything. They make no comment. They just nod, which in a way is more eloquent than if they were to make some comment. So that was a very moving experience for us. So as we commemorate this 150th anniversary of Sand Creek, I think it's a good year not only to remember Sand Creek and what happened there then, but to honor the people who died there. People who had lived right here in Boulder, the Arapaho people. There were about 60 of them under Left Hand, and there were only about 2 of them who survived. So they all died there. And especially to remember the peace chiefs like Left Hand, a man of peace who believed in peace, who believed that different people could find a way somehow to live together, and who actually, he never, as hard as things got in his time, he never gave up on that belief, and he finally gave his life for it. So I think that, I think the Lord has a way of bringing good out of the most horrible things. And perhaps that is some of the good that can come out of Sand Creek, is this acknowledgement and this maybe to continue, to try in our own lives to continue this belief and to keep it alive that Left Hand had lived for and had died for. Thank you.